Hello, my name's Darcy and I'm one of your friendly neighborhood teen librarians. Today we're going to be weaving small bags from yarn. So I always knew that you could weave flat things, but I had no clue that you could actually weave bags in the round on a small piece of cardboard. I found this method in the book Spider's Games, a book for beginning weavers by Philis Morrison. It's a little bit older, but it is absolutely worth a look if you're interested in weaving. You can check it out from your EBR library if you'd like to try more interesting weaving projects. But let's talk about what you'll need to create a small woven bag. If you picked up the kit from the main library, you should have one small piece of cardboard, a few bundles of yarn, probably 3 in different colors, and one bobby pin. You will also want to have a pencil, a set of scissors, and a ruler is super useful. So if you didn't get the kit, no worries. You can find yarn and cardboard and bobby pins at certainly any craft store, but probably also just a general grocery store or a Walmart. We're going to weave a small bag on one piece of cardboard using the in-out method of weaving. It's a common and super simple kind of weaving that a lot of our clothes and fabrics are already made of. Woven fabrics tend to be really sturdy and have very little stretch, while kind of a knit fabric has a lot of stretch, like a t-shirt is usually knit. If you look really closely at your clothing, you can usually tell if a fabric is a woven fabric or a knit fabric. If it's woven, it looks something like little squares on a grid often. If it's knit, it'll look more like stacks of V's in straight up and down lines. So here's some of the things you'll need to know about weaving. Woven fabrics have a weft and a warp. This is a warp and this is a weft. The warp is static. Once you've set them in place, you move other threads around them, but they stay where they are. The weft is active. You build them up as you weave them around the warps. If your warp and weft are evenly spaced, like this example, you're making the most common of weaves. So common it doesn't even really have a standard name. But weaving doesn't have to evenly focus on the warps and the wefts. If you weave in such a way that the wefts are mostly or completely covered by the warps, your finished fabric will be warp facing and might look like this. If you weave the warps mostly or completely covered by the wefts, your fabric will be weft facing. The bag that we're making today is weft facing. So, the very first step in this kind of weaving is setting up our loom. Now, you have a fairly decent sized piece of cardboard. You can make a big bag with this because your bag is going to stretch over the entire piece of cardboard. But for this example, I have cut down a tiny piece of cardboard to show you how it works on. So you're going to take your piece of board and mark at the top edge every 1/4 inch. But you're going to try and shift your marks so that the ends are a little bit closer to the edges because we're going to have to wrap around that edge. It's okay if it's not perfect, but that's what we're going to try. Okay, so now that we have our lines in place, you're going to take your scissors and snip in on each of those lines and go a decent way, but not too far. All right, so we've got all of our little slots snipped in the top of our cardboard, and now we are ready to wrap our warps. So we're gonna pick out the color that we are interested in using for our warp thread. I'm gonna go with red. Okay, so to wrap, we're gonna start with this leftmost notch, and I'm gonna leave maybe 6 inches, a little bit more, of my thread stray when I notch it in there. Pull it tight and straight around the bottom, back up to the top, and into the same notch. Haha. And then we're going to take our thread and pull it over to the next notch and loop it around. So you've got a little loop on this side and your thread's coming down the opposite end. And we are going to wrap back up into that same notch and do the same looping maneuver on this opposite side. Loop around, down, up to the same notch. And we're going to do that for all of the rest until you get to the end. We have wrapped everybody, and now we're here at the end. And if you count your threads, you will have an even number. It's just part of the way that this particular loom works. But to do the in and out method correctly, you actually need an odd number of warps. So what we're going to do is add just one notch here at the bottom so that we will have an odd number of warps to weave on. Now, if you double wrapped yours like I did, you can undo this last warp right here, this last set of warps, and then just do one side. So I'm going to add a notch here, and that's going to be our last warp in. I'm going to give it a little tail, snip it off. All right, let's count our warps now. 27 warps, an odd number, which is what we need to be carrying on with. So you're gonna have a bit of weirdness here when you get done with your bag, but you can kind of shift things around. It's gonna be totally fine. Now that we have all of our warps in place, these are gonna stay and we're not really gonna mess with them until the very end. We're gonna weave around them using our bobby pin as a needle. So to start laying in your wefts, which are going to be the horizontal lines that run across of our warps, you're going to have to pick a color. So I'm going to start with this lovely yellow. You're going to unroll a piece about as long as an outstretched arm. Don't want it to be too long because then you might get knots. Snip it off. Thread one end into your bobby pin, just like that. And then we are going to weave. So we're going to go under, over, under, over, under, over, all the way to the end. You might have to pull through about halfway. Just make sure you're not skipping any warps. All right. Once you get to the end of one side, for this first one, we're going to pull our thread through until we've just got a tiny bit hanging. And now we have woven our first side. But before we go crazy, we're going to beat it down is what this is called. To beat something down, you're just pushing it all the way to the bottom and then kind of pulling it tight. So you want it as tight to the bottom as you can get it. We're going to do this with every single side of a weaving that we do. And that's going to keep our stitches really, really tight, or our woven bits really, really tight in there. All right, so now that that's really well beaten down, we're going to just loop the corner. So remember, when you loop, our last covering of a warp here is an over. So that means that this first warp over here needs to be an under. And it's important to keep on pattern, and you will see in a minute. So we're going to go the same. We're going to go under, over this whole side, and then we'll stop when we get to the end of this side. And now we're going to beat it down. And that is our first round of weaving. So this was an under. We're going to go to the next one, and we're going to start with an over. Now, before I wrap around, you'll notice that on this wrap around is the opposite pattern of our very first run. So this is how you know you're staying in pattern. You want each covering of your warp to be the opposite of the one before it. So if you realize when you get to a loop that this is not the pattern that you're getting, that means you either skipped someone on the back side or the previous side, or somewhere you've gone slightly awry, or you have an even number of warps, and that will not lead to success. So you'll need to make sure you've got an odd number of warps and you're weaving your weft over under all the way around. So I'm going to go into super fast forward mode until we get to the end of this piece of yarn. See you in a minute. Okay, as we get to the end of our first run of yarn, you're going to weave it as far weaving as you can. You're going to weave it in as much as possible. So I've got this little tail here that I might snip off so we don't turn the corner right now. But you'll weave it down, make sure everything's nicely beaten down on both sides. Then I'm going to snip off this little tail. If this had happened towards the middle, I would just have woven it all the way through so it was completely used up the yarn and I didn't have to snip. All right, so this is not enough of a bag to be a bag. We have to decide if we want to continue with this yellow yarn, if we want to switch to a different color. So I think I'm going to switch to a different color, but the process is the same either way. You're going to get another piece of yarn. We're going to go with orange. About as long as your outstretched arm. It can be a little shorter if you want, but you don't want to go much longer than that. All right, gonna thread it onto our bobby pin. And now we ended on this warp right here, but to start a new thread, we're gonna go back 3 or 4 or 5 warps. Now the trick here is instead of going opposite, because we're going to start on top of our previous thread, you're going to follow this same pattern that you've already got going on here. You're not going to switch over. So we'll go under, over, under, over, under, over, and then we'll pull it through here all the way to the end and tap it down. Now this will give you a couple of spots where you've got doubled up warp pattern, but that is okay. That is better than tying a knot, which is going to look kind of bad. You'll definitely notice a knot more than you notice kind of a stray thread, especially once we come back over with our orange. This will disappear effectively. So we're just going to keep weaving. We'll flip around and continue our pattern. And I will see you when this bag is done. We're just gonna weave our little hearts out. It is gonna take a while, so be patient. And that's how you weave in a new thread. Don't worry about these little tails. You can always flip your bag inside out when you're done, or you can tuck them in a little bit better once your weaving is tight. So I will see you when this bag is finished. Magic! So I have gone ahead and woven almost all the way up to the top. Now I could probably get a little bit tighter in there, but my cardboard is starting to break down a little bit. So if that happens, you can kind of wiggle your cardboard, keep going if you want, but I am just going to show you how to finish off your bag. So when we wove our warps onto the loom, we made sure by the looping pattern that we did, we made sure that none of them actually go over the top. So we're just going to slowly free all of these little loops, right? See, that one is free. Go down the line and unloop them. If you ruin your cardboard loom with this, well, it was only cardboard and probably not much to worry about. Okay, so now that all of our loops are undone, we're going to slide that cardboard out carefully. Nice. All right, make sure we're not losing our strings. So we got one string here. This was the end of our wefts. And now we've got these weird little loops at top. So there are a couple ways you can finish this bag. We're actually just going to squunch up our warps, our wefts. So we pushed everything down so much that we've got quite a lot there. So we're just going to kind of smoosh them up so that they fill up to the top. Make sure you're keeping a finger on this guy who's our one stray warp weft. All right, and once you've kind of wiggled everything to where you want to go, you're going to tie off the end of your weft and this stray warp into one little knot. I'm going to double knot it just to be extra tight. Snip that. All right, so we could definitely be done here. This is a pretty good little tiny bag. Yours will probably be bigger, but what instead I'm going to do is flip it inside out so that all of our little stray threads are on the other side. And you can kind of tuck anybody else through. And that also means that this stray warp thread can just be snipped. So that is a weft facing bag woven in the round. And you have made it. Congratulations. You can go super big on these if you want, or make them super tiny like this guy. You can sew in zippers. You can add different kind of fastenings. You could probably find a way to rig up a drawstring if you wanted this bag to close. Just kind of whatever works for you. Experiment. It does take a while to weave, so I didn't sit here and make you watch, but just weaving this much of a weft took me about an hour. Maybe a little bit less, and I'm pretty fast. So take your time, be patient with yourself. You'll get better as you go. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.